Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Moxtober Daily Recap. I'm your guest host, Mark Confidant. For those of you who don't know, Moxtober is an annual event during the month of October where people do creative work related to Magic the Gathering. People do fan art, custom decks, and other stuff. But here, we're focused on custom card designs. Today's prompt is Legacy. And before we hop into it, let me say that the card file for cards discussed today and instructions on how to submit can be found in the description below. My two guests are Juliet of the Beacon of Creation podcast and Bradley Rose of the Beacon of Creation podcast and the blog Milling for 53. All right. Let's just hop into it. Let's start with a card from the mtg.design file. It is Legacy of Marit Lage. It's a blue and a black for a snow enchantment. When you cast a snow spell, put an ice counter on Legacy of Marit Lage. And for 2 and a snow, each opponent loses a life and mills a card. Put an ice counter on Legacy of Marit Lage. And for blue and a black, until end of turn, Legacy of Marit Lage becomes a reflection creature in addition to its other types and gains flying, indestructible, and this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of ice counters on it. So I like a couple of the things going on here. I like it being a snow reward as far as things go, but a snow reward that kind of at its bare minimum case can still produce a truly big thing eventually. I like the fact that it's going for that whole spend a bunch of mana and on turn a zillion you have a giant thing that is kind of intrinsic to Marit Lage conceptually. And I like that it counts up instead of counting down, because Marit Lage obviously gets problematic with counter removal, where this, I guess the worst thing you could do as far as that goes is maybe proliferate repeatedly, but even that's just playing to a real game plan. Everything that allows you to add a bunch of counters, this just gradually gets good with, but those things are all priced in at a pretty accurate rate, where counter removal for something that starts with a bajillion counters isn't really priced in at a very accurate rate. So this just seems like a fair gold rewarding enchantment. I like that a lot.
I like that. I don't think we've seen whenever you caring about snow spells, in particular, maybe snow permanents and such, and snow mana has been cared about. Obviously, on this card as the snow mana carrying. So that's cool to see on this. I see that if someone wants to try to stop this, that you can, as long as you hold up blue and black mana, you can just give it indestructible. But at least with the creature type, maybe you can get rid of it via minus X effects or exile or some other way. So that's a cool way to give an additional knob to the instant speed indestructible in response to destruction effects. So it's cool. There is a second way to go about this with the milling as well.
I also go ahead.
My favorite thing about this card is in the second ability, each opponent loses 1 life and mills a card. I think it's a great thing to make this card just more base, socketable into other strategies. And makes it a more appealing card across a variety of decks, so that you're not only playing this in the that most broken of specifics.
One thing that I was going to say about the indestructibility in particular is that it puts a big deflator on trying to use destructive removal against this. But the fact that this thing requires counters and takes quite a long while to get spun up kind of makes a nice situation where you can use unsummon style removal against this, which usually has not the most positive reputation, unless you're in a format with a lot of tokens or a lot of other stuff that can get unsummoned and functionally removed by it. Then unsummons aren't super great. But if you boomeranged this when it had 12 counters on it or something like that, you've set your opponent behind substantially. They've done a lot of work to get there. So it can end up being pretty similar to removal, even as you're putting a deflator on your disenchants or your murders of the world.
Our next card is going to be from the MSE file. It's going to be Diminishing Returns asterisk, designed by MBTree. And it's a silver bordered card. It's one of the black for sorcery that has kind of a fun take on the thing that we've seen most recently in real magic, or in canon magic as cleave, is kind of square brackets. But in this case, it's also playing on the idea of legacy mechanics, in a legacy board game. Or there are a variety of legacy cubes that were in fashion once upon a time. And in this case, the card gets weaker each game that you cast it in, until eventually it is just destroy target creature. You lose 3 life, which is still, fine. That very bottom base rate could be a lot worse. So it doesn't become worthless. But it's I think this is a fun kind of take on a silver bordered approach to the bracketing.
I really enjoy the way that the bracketing here seems to almost be like putting the other bracketing on blast from Cleave.
Mm-hmm.
It's just funny to like intentionally take it to its logical extreme to make fun of it in a way that leaves this very like funny in the uncard sense, but then still has a card that has a lot of mechanical functionality to it, even if the rate like the first time you cast it is super duper crazy.
I like that it's not just it's like combining two like there's Cleave and then there's also the playtest card that did go and explore legacy mechanic style play, but in that way it's less exciting than the card that we're seeing here because you're just marking off like little nodes and this is a little more fun to give you a little more choice and difference in each thing that you mark off. So excellent work.
I really like the idea of legacy style mechanics in Magic. I think that something like a legacy style cube would be really, really sweet if anybody wanted to design it. It's really challenging that that's not very doable in digital, ironically enough, where in paper you could easily see like taking a legacy style cube to like a GP or something like that and having like running drafts of it through the span of like the whole weekend and then just at the end of it blanking it, but having continuity between people who show up to draft it multiple times throughout the cube or throughout the GP.
Yeah, the like when you own a cube in paper, like you are like if you're probably participating in each of the drafts. So you are the carrier of the like the history of the cube. You bring with you the like the legacy of what this cube has been through, and you can even talk about like when someone plays this card, you're like, oh yeah, Sally last time she go and whited out that, and that was and blah blah blah, and then you start getting into talking about the last time you drafted, which was at the store, and that was really interesting. And then there was another story you could talk. That's really cool. And yeah, in digital, it's harder to do unless you like start a campaign, quote unquote, and try to carry something that ties between all of the sessions. But being an owner of a cube, you're the person that can help enable why each session matters.
Yeah, and it's hard to like you'd have to have the owner of the cube getting like PMs from players that are like, hey, this card got edited to this, and then edit it in the card file. It's like it's much more difficult to do in digital than in paper, which you see some of in Magic in general, but not like as much as you used to. You don't see any more of that. Whatever that card is from Born of the Gods that separates things into 3 piles. That was just a nightmare for them to code. Apparently, you don't see a lot of that.
Whims of Fates. Yeah,
that sounds right.
Whims of the Fates. Yeah.
Bradley, what's your first card?
Oh, before I forget, this is designed by MBTree.
Mm-hmm.
I think you mentioned that. So my first card is in the mtg.design file. Let's go to the Phyrexian Invasion, designed by CyberFive. Okay. I know it's kind of funny to have an artifact enchantment saga, but besides that, this is cool in that this tells the story of what looks like invasion block. The first one it feels like the invasion here. I haven't thought of what card this might tie to or mechanic, but the second step here is a reference to domain. That's cool, which is great because it also ties into the third chapter, the final one, which references legacy weapons ability, which does require all 5 colors. So there's some synergy even with your references. That's great. And Apocalypse set was when legacy weapon was reprinted. So that's awesome to have that reference as the final chapter. I think this is well executed of the events of the Phyrexian Invasion.
I am pretty impressed that they managed to get away with legendary artifact enchantment in the type line. It's doable from time to time, but it's always a feat when someone manages to have it and then have a subtype and not have to go to the thin font.
Was the last one in Theros, or have we seen one since then?
I think the last one was there, but like you can't do legendary enchantment artifact equipment, for example. You have to go thin font for that. There may have been something else that had like I forget what it was, like 3 types and then odd or something. No, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a feat when it happens. And I also think that this card, like the wish is really sweet, and it's like you're wishing for either a protagonist or antagonist from among the Phyrexian Invasion story, at least in theory.
Yeah.
And is that the planar overlay, or is that a different
I feel
time
like
period? I don't know all of the events totally straight in my head.
I feel like in my head that's either the player overlay or like people from Weatherlight like showing up to fight the invasion. And just like whichever one you get, it's that for the sake of the argument. I kind of feel like the second mode could be like a star soldier with all colors, and then its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. Maybe that gets too expensive in terms of lines.
5/5s. I mean, for 7 colorless mana.
Oh, it's for each basic land. I thought it had all of the colors of basic land types from among lands you control. Oh, yeah, no, I misread that.
Mm-hmm. It's fun because this is just like a straight up domain effect with a fun little set of gold soldiers, rather than colorless. That's all colors probably even works better than colorless in the very like narrow margins of a saga.
Oh yeah. Let's see. Plain white celebration made citizen creature token. That's all colors. So that's, I guess that matches what we've seen before.
There's also what's banned in all the exterior formats? The Wooburg win condition card.
Coalition victory?
Yeah. If you've got a soldier that's all colors and you've got all your basic lands and you've got everything,
Kind of sad that Coalition victory isn't a legendary sorcery there, because then you could wish for Coalition victory on the first step of this, create your 5 color soldiers on the second step, and then you don't even need the third step, you just Coalition victory.
Right. It's like you either get a Coalition victory or you fire the legacy weapon.
Either way, that's sweet.
Printed an invasion block, of course, because of domain. Yeah.
Let's stay in the mtg.design file and do Almantet, Alhammarret's Legacy. So this is 4 blue for a 3/3 Sphinx with flying. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand and the other into your graveyard, and players can't cast spells with the same name as a card in a graveyard. So Alhammarret similarly had a silence style ability on it where it allowed you to prevent one spell from being cast, which is probably a little bendy in blue, but let's brush over that for the moment at least. And I just like that this is aspiring to the same sort of thing, but then you are getting some card selection out of it, but card selection that comes with like this asterisk of you might silence yourself out of some other card in your hand if you do it incorrectly, or you might proactively mill something of your own because you know that your opponent also has a card like that with the same name as that. I feel like there's a reasonable amount of play to this, and it feels like a solid riff for like an uncommon Sphinx that is legendary and feels connected to Alhammarret.
Can you imagine in, I guess limited or block constructed, milling over, your top 2 cards are 2 cards with the same name?
That would be a backbreaker.
Yeah. I mean, you still get a 3/3 flyer, but for 6 mana.
Yeah, this is I like that this could come up in some formats that you want to go and include a lot of the same name. I was just trying to think how often I could make that happen in a limited environment. I guess I can't without doing something weird by increasing the names.
So does this turn off? Sorry, go on.
Oh, unless I have like a card in that environment that just says this has all names, just to, I don't know, be cheeky with this one, but that's maybe not worth it. All right, go ahead.
Does this turn off flashback, retrace, disturb, etc.?
I need to look at the steps of casting a spell.
Ooh.
Because I feel like the card leaves the graveyard, but they might have changed how it does it as far as like recursively checking things. It might be that you need to legally able to cast a spell to begin attempting to cast the spell, and it's not that it goes back and checks, or that it does both. I would need to look at the machine. I feel like my gut says yes, but I'm not positive.
And then I don't know if you're casting a disturb. Does it have the name of the backside exclusively? Does it have the name of the front side? Because it only transforms once you like cast it.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily know the steps there.
It's pretty tricky. If it should probably have some sort of like, maybe it should have a graveyard hate ability in addition to that. Like players can't cast spells from graveyards, just so that there isn't this like unintuitive thing of like, I thought I was going to shut off your faithless looting, and then I didn't, because that's like pretty disappointing when it happens, I think. There's like a weird complexity to a lot of the like can't cast stuff in a certain area things, just because the process of casting a spell changes its location during doing it.
How would you feel if this did more of a oh gosh, like a chalice type effect where there's it rather than delimits casting it.
But like where it counters it when it's cast, if it had
Mm-hmm.
that would
Yeah.
explicitly not stop the flashback though, because it's like gone by then.
Right, but it would counter the effect.
Oh no, but like because you cast it, the attempt to counter would happen by the time it was already out of the graveyard. So it wouldn't stop it.
But you would be casting it from the graveyard, right? Actually, I think so. In the same way that you cast something from your hand, it does leave your hand at some point.
So is it like a chalice that stops things specifically from the graveyard, or like is the text players whenever a player casts a spell with the same name as a card in a graveyard,
Counter it.
counter it.
Yeah, you're right. This is
put it on the stack.
Still confusing.
Yeah,
as part of making it cast, quote unquote. So it will be gone by then.
At every point when the stack is empty, note the name of all cards in graveyards.
All right, there we go.
Let's see if we can beat Tackle Maggot for rules text link.
Let's see. And Mark, do you want to mention that?
Shout out to ALiteralOnion for this card.
Sorry.
I'd like to look on the MSE. We're looking at Wisps of Recollection by Reuben. It's a 2 and a blue sorcery common. Create 2/2/2 blue illusion creature tokens with, if you control no non-token creatures, sacrifice this creature. And my general questions are, how do we feel about this as an illusion drawback? How do we feel about this rate in blue? How do we feel about this in common?
I think the rate is cool. Always love seeing the blue aggro illusion deck because we get the 1 mana 2/2 bear. For control no non-token creatures, flavorful. I think I like that challenge. Yeah, I think this is a cool try to introduce some other way to demonstrate illusions.
I feel like I would want to put this in a color that has token creatures more prevalently. It's just kind of strange to me that it's specifically... Well, no, actually, I can see this in blue just like for memory. I could also see this in red for like interpersonal connection. Like people still care about like people from the past or something like that. I'm torn about it as right and blue because like blue gets good creatures with drawbacks that specifically like lead to them being temporary or not durable as far as things go. But I feel like oftentimes people accidentally create things that are drawbacks that aren't really drawbacks in blue, specifically because of the nature of blue's drawbacks and the fact that like it's occasionally hard to parse how real a drawback is. So like 4 power spread across 2 bodies is pretty like strong to both like traditional removal and quite a good like aggressive stat line on the whole. And that leaves me slightly anxious. Like playing this plus something that rewards you for non-creature spells on like a regular non-token creature together would be like a very efficient aggro deck.
I think I would be much happier with this in red. I think even at like 3 and a blue in blue, this would be a reasonable rate, I think. But I'm someone who sees, hey, as you increase the power and toughness on blue cards, you kind of devalue every other color because that's the only thing blue can't do most of the time.
Yeah, I think I agree with that in general. It's kind of weird because like creature combat has been more and more defining over the course of Magic, so if you don't give blue like stat lines that at least function, then it starts to be like primarily a support color, or like you just I guess are playing against the assumption that some of the drawbacky things you do in blue are gonna hit harder than you imagine. I don't know. It's hard to try and figure out like how blue is supposed to do stuff in the context of creatures getting better.
I do like that the drawback is like connected. That if the drawback triggers it takes them both out. I think that's a good design.
I like this at 3 mana to give a challenge for decks that maybe want to try to drop something on turn 1, then drop another curve on turn 2, and then cast this on turn 3 so that there's not just the 1/2 drop you have that's holding it all together and then they cast a Doomblade or a Murder on your 1 non-token creature and it wipes out your entire board.
I do think the drawback is a little free and limited. It's a little bit just like you will eventually, like even if you have to wait a turn to do this or wait until like turn 5 when ideally you're going like 2 drop and this, at a certain point it is just 2/2 at a certain stage in the game.
I think this is less of a drawback than the like familiar can't block or attack alone sort of thing is. I don't think this is not a drawback, but I think this is not a this is not a big enough drawback that you would really want to cost this aggressively, in my personal opinion.
Yeah. Like this, the risky play here would only be if you want to curve on turn 3 and you only have a 2-drop, you're intentionally taking a risk. But otherwise, if you draw this later in the game, this could just be like, oh yeah, this is just says make 2/2/2s for free.
Yeah. Bradley, what's your next card?
Oh, okay. Let's stay in the MSE file here, and let's go to Gilran, Royal Tutor. If you can see a designer column on this, shout that out. I don't see it, my column here. 1 green, white, a legendary creature, human knight. It has mentor, mentor, mentor. So it triggers 3 times. If this was cast from exile, it enters the battlefield transformed. It has suspend 3 for green and a white. It's a 3/2. Flavor text, watch closely. Backside. Gilran's Legacy, creature, human, army. It enters the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters. It's a 3/3. Each creature you control with the +1/+1 counter on it has first strike, vigilance, and trample. Flavor text, centuries after Gilran's passing, the Knights of Paravel still teach their squires his techniques. All right, so I think this one is interesting to me in particular because of often when I see legendary creatures, I think about them in the commander context. But it's really cool that this actually has some cool like reasoning and gameplay for in a non-commander context. If you're playing in a constructed 60 card, you're going to want, if you already have Gilran on the battlefield, you're going to want to cast the Suspend, and Suspend only works if it's from your hand, and it does not apply for a commander context. And that's a nice niche space where you can be like, okay, I'm going to be able to still benefit when I have my second card in hand. And this, we've seen that approaches to this before in the Time Spiral block, where they try to have you discard the extra cards that you have of legendary creatures. So well done for that.
I love anytime you get to see that keyword setup, and going into the backside into an army, I think that's great. I'm a big fan of, there's a lot of designs today for the legacy theme where, here's the kind of transformed version of the legacy after the card, and doing it into an army with those abilities. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I feel like this is as a way of making up for the legacy drawback, is a very good design. I worry that cumulatively the rate on this is very, very pushed. Because basically what you can do with this is if you are able to curve 1-drop, 2-drop Gilran, and the next turn your 1-drop can get +1, or +2/+2, and your drop can get +1/+1 ideally. And then if you aren't able to curve like that, you just suspend it as a 6/6 on time delay. Either way, it's quite useful there. And if you have 2 of them in hand, you suspend on turn 2 after casting a 1-drop, and you just mentor onto the 1-drop twice with your Gilran on turn 4. It just ends up being that a lot of the drawback from a legendary thing is lost without a lot of the benefits from a legendary thing being lost. So it might just be that while this design is very appealing, all of the things that it does together are kind of too strong in conjunction with one another, I think.
Okay.
Do you think you can tweak it down?
I think you can tweak it down.
Counter on the back, things like that, yeah.
Make it double legendary so you can only have 1 in your whole deck.
Oh, yeah. Playtest card is, what is it? Or Mega Legendary?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Now you have a choice. That's kind of interesting.
And Mark, what's your next card?
My next card is, let's see. It's going to be from the mtg.design file. It is Forgotten Grove. For 2 mana, it's an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, name a card, and the chosen spell cannot be named by other spells or permanents. I think this is a really interesting sideboard hate card. I don't think the rate on it is super great, but I just like the fact that it's kind of hate for other hate. I feel like it could be 1 mana cheaper to be able to proactively stop stuff like Cabal Therapy. And I also just like the idea that this is the antithesis of a legacy. Your name will be forgotten. And the flavor text capture that as well. Spike Cannibal, did such a creature even exist? Is just a great way to be oh yeah, no, you've been forgotten about.
So the the legend rule works so that it keys off of names, right? So that's cool to also be able to use this besides all the ways that you can have card effects like Pithing Needle or whatever. Yeah, so I like being able to maybe play my other legendaries at the same time or at the same name.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. Wait, I read that wrong. It doesn't erase their name. It just can't be named by others. Okay.
Right. Although I think your version might be a little bit more interesting to play. Well, like, hey, you can do your mirror gallery, but only for one card at a time. Yeah, this as like hate for hate, as it were, I think is an interesting space. It makes me think about like, well, a lot of the other naming effects aren't super played already, but like obviously Pithing Needle is the big one, and Meddling Mage in some humans decks and stuff, but Pithing Needle is the big one. Which makes then I go, well, because this is so narrow, and the thing it's going up against is mostly a 1-mana artifact, does this need to be like 1 mana in order to fight against that? But then it's like, well, the real thing Pithing Needle does is it gets fetched by Urza Saga. So, and then like you can kind of go down that rabbit hole pretty eventually. But yeah, it's this is a fun design for this theme. I'm really happy to see something trying to do this sort of flavor for a Forgotten Grave.
I'm not familiar enough with, like, we've mentioned about the format legacy. Do you think this is a commentary on the legacy format as well, right?
I'm specifically speaking from like 90% talking about modern, 10% talking about legacy. Both places where Urza Saga picking up Pithing Needle like definitely happens, but I think Pithing Needle is like much more powerful in modern because I mean the number of decks in the card pool is smaller and the power level is lower, which means it can punch at a kind of higher weight class.
Yeah. Okay. Didn't quite. Okay. If it does only reach modern, then oh man, we're trying to get to legacy. That's good because that's the 1-2 punch.
Oh, right.
Here.
Sure. Yeah.
the flavor, but also the format aiming is cool. I mean, I guess you can always just cost it, I don't know, 0 mana and draw a card and enter the battlefield. That's bonkers. There you go. Legacy playable. I don't know.
Well, the funny thing about it is in Legacy, of course, you could tap Ancient Tomb for this. But like, how many decks want to do an Ancient Tomb thing and want to protect their combo with this sort of setup from specifically and exactly something like Pithing Needle, rather than do any sort of removal.
There is one other thing in Legacy specifically that this stops, which is Cabal Therapy. They can't name anything with Cabal Therapy, or they can't name whatever you're protecting with Cabal Therapy.
Take that.
That's a great point. I hadn't thought about specifically really kind of just that type of discard spell, just the predictive one. Predict also, you can stop people casting literally the card Predict, or at least to great effect. And of course, Declaration of Not, Nevermore, etc. The funny thing is, like, if a card's already named it, like if you play this after there's a Meddling Mage in play, it doesn't like remove that effect off of the battlefield. And that's another thing that I think would suggest that Bradley's idea of like, hey, pick a name, cards with that name don't have a name, would be much more useful as proactive hate on its own against certain types of, certain specific tutor effects or things like that. And as like something that you're able to do to get to counteract against Meddling Mage type effects.
Possibly it should have some other text instead that's like reactive. So things that name that lose that name or something like that. Just to be able to do like...
Whenever a card is named, it can't be named for the rest of the game?
Oh, no. I was thinking like when this, as it enters the battlefield, like you name a card and the chosen spell can't be named, and also things that already name that thing lose the ability that names that thing or whatever. Like lose the name that they have named. I don't know how you'd say that in a rulesy way, but like being able to reactively be like, oh, you Nevermored my commander? Okay, well, I'm going to Forgotten Grave, and your Nevermore is no longer naming my commander. And nothing can name my commander, so no more Nevermores for it.
Yeah. Shout out to wantaname for, or Want a Name, with a fun card that provoked a really interesting discussion about names.
What's in a name? I believe you're up next, Juliet.
Okay, let's take a look at... let's go on the mtg.design file. And let's take a look at Mox Ichorstone. which is rather than 0, for a Mox, it's a Phyrexian colorless mana. So you can pay it with no mana. Legendary artifact, you can't gain life. It's got some stuff that allows you to put charge counters on anything, but then also spend charge counters on this to get any color of mana. So this is a fun, I think, Phyrexian take on a Mox. I think it might still be like too good for anything in the standard range of play, but it's probably in the relatively safe space of like legacy and vintage, of course. Whether or not this kind of busts things in modern would be something I'd be really interested to see.
So it's 4 life for a Mox with suspend 1, basically, right? Or like 4 life for a Mox, like half a Mox, but like the back half, not the front half.
And then you pay 2 mana, or you can use it every other turn for another 2 life.
Or mana, but like you don't want to. Well, I mean, I guess you can also like kind of coalition relic it, in that you can store a mana with it a little bit.
Yeah, you could overturns, but you can still only get one mana per kind of turn cycle from it in the output side.
It's like it can be a storage land with a maximum capacity of 1.
Right. For the cost of no land drop. One of the things that we've seen this past week, not to just be like so insular to just modern, but is the testing of Birthing Pod and whether or not it's like obviously totally broken. And one of the things that they kind of found out is, well, the life cost, if you are just like always paying the life to try to cheat on the mana and everything, the Phyrexian life payments really add up in a modern day constructed format. And so that I think is interesting. It's possible that there's like places in historic that this could be safe because of that, but I don't know.
There's also this weird thing that happens to designers sometimes where when they see things that allow you to pay a bunch of life, they immediately assume that it will just naturally slot into Death Shadow. And it's possible this would be just straight up a Mox for Death Shadow, or like a pseudo Mox for Death Shadow. But I feel like there's this thing where people assume that because that's the case, you don't want to necessarily design things like that. Where I think that the problematic synergy card in the case where this is broken in only Death Shadow and nowhere else is probably Death Shadow, which has like a lot of reward for like a very dangerous thing. But like the tools that allow you to control the context of that danger get stronger over time anytime life is used as a drawback. And I don't think that you want to say life should never be used as a drawback just because like Death Shadow is a bonkers card.
Mm-hmm.
I like the legendary edition here as maybe some sort of valve besides the safety of having tap symbols involved here. It's funny that this actually, like, adding this to the card pool makes Mox Opal, if you dare, combine a bunch of Moxes in your deck, makes Mox Opal a little bit cooler. So you can play Chrome Mox Opal on this, and now you can produce a color if you would like, and then it's off to the races from there. If you're building for some reason a Mox tribal deck, by that point, I guess.
This comes so close to turning on Mox Amber, but doesn't quite get there.
Yeah. Yep. You could just, I guess, if whatever you decide to cast, maybe with your Mox Opal or other, like you do a cascade effect, right? You have your legendary 1-drop. Okay, now I'm just building some kind of whatever that deck is, just to have a turn 1
it's Emery, right?
Yes, for sure.
You go Ichorstone, Opal, Amber, Emery, and now your Amber taps because of your Emery.
Oh, there you go. There you go. You solved it. No, yeah, it's a lot of fun to see colorless Phyrexian mana. That's awesome.
Yeah. This design was by RabidAddict. If you want to check out a bunch of cool Mox things, last year for Moxtober, Cajun did a Mox card for every single day, and there's a lot of really cool designs from there.
It's impressive how many of them are like genuinely real cards where the card assessment is like, I don't know whether this would be a broken Mox or not. I guess that's kind of inherent to Moxen in general, but like I didn't think that a person would be able to get 31 days out of it, and Cajun managed to do that with, I assume, ease, but it might have been a difficult process on them.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Brad, what's your next card?
All right, let's go with, we're going to be staying here in the mtg.design file, Brago's Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I like voting innovation. A little what do you call it? Disclaimer: I do like conspiracy sets, though, so maybe I'm biased. But all right, so we've seen before being able to have an additional vote on like Brago's representatives. So that's really cool. That like, oh hey, Brago's has a history of just like playing with the system. So it's cool that this character is picked here. And then voting last is something I haven't seen before. So that's a fun thing. And then what's the reward? Drawing a card, always a good thing to do. It also maybe is a cheeky reference to being the monarch in this case. But yeah, now you get to have the luxury of hey, a lot of people are going to be against this voting card I picked. Like, obviously I want to pick the other side, but you know what? Now I'm going to pick with them and draw a card. So I don't really lose out much. So I think that's a very cool solution to making voting matter, and especially if you're playing a lot of voting cards anyway, where people will keep voting against you. So good.
This is an all-star A+ card for me. I love the mechanics of flavor here.
Should this have on ties also draw a card?
Oh, more. It only says more. That's a good call out there.
I like it as is, but I could believe that testing would prove the alternative.
I feel like when you are voting last and you get like a tied vote coming across the table to you, and it's just like, oh, it's 2-2, I get to decide. That seems like such a delicious position to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're like, not only do I control the whims of fate, but I also get a card for doing it.
It's also interesting that like voting last reads like just a drawback, but plays much more like small bonus.
Yes, yeah, with that tacking on that last ability there, make sure it doesn't turn out to be
I suppose there's maybe.
But yeah, that is fun. It is funny to say like usually you don't ever want to go last in things, right?
I feel like there's maybe a slight politics drawback to voting last, in that like the people who vote first are less likely to get like cajoled by a person into voting how that person wants to go. But like if the vote's close and you're the last voter, you might have like a player that has some like, I don't know, 5/5 or something like that, and they're like, I'm gonna hit you in the face with this if you don't vote the way I want to vote.
If every player in a 4-person conspiracy game has a Brago's Legacy out, how does voting resolve?
I believe it returns back to AppNap order at that point. Because I guess one of them replaces, and then I believe that the replacement effects apply in. I think that the player who
we might just hand this one as an exercise for the reader.
Yeah.
I think it's like it would work the way like Regenerate works when you have the way like having something die and it can either be exiled and give you a thing, or it can just be regular exiled works. You get to choose which of the two things exiles it. But like for this, I believe the player who controls the vote would replace things in the order they wanted to, I think.
Yeah, this could be probably even reminder texted or whatever, but great job, Ancestral.
Yeah, sound off in the comments of this YouTube video, or come join our Discord and tell us about the rules.
Yes.
So I believe I am next up on this one. Mm-hmm. And let's go to mcg.design and look at Volta's Cataclysm / Thrill of Exploration. So this is on its front half a legendary sorcery for 1 red, and you can only cast legendary sorceries if you control a legendary creature or planeswalker, and it deals 3 damage to each creature, player, and planeswalker. And on the back side is a sorcery for 1 and a red with add 2 mana in any combination of colors. So I just enjoy that this is like a good way to use MDFCs to compensate for the inherent drawback in legendary spells. So I think that honestly, you could realistically start printing legendary sorceries legendary instants or sorceries at uncommon with something like this, like the MDFC giving you a way to do something else with it. Because you all of a sudden have a card that's not very likely to just fester in your hand, and you're just playing the back half in that sort of situation. And this back half is a little bit underwhelming as far as things go. It's like a Manamorphose minus drawing the card, but it can like fix your colors to allow you to cast something else. It can get you a prowess trigger, I suppose. Not that that's particularly impressive. I would probably honestly want some slightly different back half on this as far as things go. But on the mean, I think that the core core concept here, though, like using double-faced cards to make legendary instants and sorceries a little more palatable is a very good intuition.
Yeah, I could see this happening, and like this is a great way to do it. I agree with the double-sided part. I want to see it in a set sometime. Just provide an out that way. Uncommon, actually, your suggestion is a great idea because it will come up more often. The whole like, oh look, I can't cast it, but I got the other side. Whereas if it was like a rare, and you might be more likely to like not see that interaction happen. Might at least less likely to see that interaction happen.
Did you know that we have not seen unrestricted add 2 mana in any combination of colors on a ritual in red since Manamorphose?
That's strange to me. I think it's still in Red's Pie.
We've seen it with restrictions, specifically for casting dragons, especially, but not just this kind of general filtering pseudo ritual storm count increaser.
Yeah. So you retain the same amount of mana. I know there was what do you call it? A weird kind of in betweensies with the Kaldheim card, which forces you to pick. Let's see. It says open the Omen Paths, add 2 mana of any one color or 2 mana of any other color. You add 2 of one and 2 of the other, but you can't just add whatever. So you are increasing in mana on that, but the restriction is only creatures and enchantments.
One thing I kind of generally wish from MDFCs was that there was some sort of reminder text for what the back half was when you were looking at one side of it. It's just kind of tricky to have like a card that you don't want to like unsleeve to reveal your opponent that you have these different options. But that only tells you the card type and mana value of the back half. You have to play this like weird memorization game. So just if this had like the name on the front half of the back half and then had like a reminder text version of, or like even just said like 2 mana, it just said the words 2 mana on the front half. So it told you like a little bit about what it did. I would like that a lot from MDFCs.
It's one of those things that like for creatures, of course, there's the little like shaded PT, and it's like, okay, right, that's helpful. For the new disturb auras, it's like, okay, great, this is going to be the creature's effects on an aura. For lands, it's usually pretty clear for the like Zendikar style MDFCs. It's like, oh right, this pathway, I can see the color, or right, the other side of this is a land, I can look at the spell right here. But for spell plus spell, I think it's particularly worse.
I know Tim, I want to say, really dislikes the MDFCs from Kaldheim and from Strixhaven. And I'm inclined to agree with him in general on that. Just the idea of having like a game piece that has like full on a rare card's worth of text on each face of it, and the two are not super conceptually connected, is a pretty frustrating exercise, especially because I'm not sure that you're allowed to, like, if your base case card is the back half, I'm not sure that you could keep the back half of it just sleeved up in your deck. I think that would be not something you get in big trouble for, but something that would be like, hey, you're not supposed to do that. And so it's kind of a pain if you're like, I'm casting this for the green face of it, but that's the back face, so I don't even get to know what the face of the card that I'm casting more often does before I cast it.
Yeah.
Perhaps Ian agreed with this mono red
card. Shout out to iemcd Ian for this design.
All right, Juliet, what's your next card?
Right. Do we think this is the last round?
Let's look at the clock. I think next round will be the last round. So this round is the second last. And the penultimate.
Fantastic. We've gotten through the antepenultimate. We're on to the penultimate before the ultimate. Let's look at on the mtg.design file, Bring to Mind by MaximumMiles. And let's see here. So this is blue, black instant, put target creature card into its owner's hand from any zone. Which is just a funky little piece of text. I don't know that we've seen this in canonical Magic. I don't know that I'm like 100% on the cost, but at the same time, it's like, well, if you're boomeranging or zombifying, not zombifying, but like if you're boomeranging or raise deading, like, you're getting these each half is not at all blue or not at all black. But this particular line of rules text to me was very interesting.
I would strike creature from this, actually.
Interesting. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a 4 mana for Boomerang or Demonic Tutor or gosh, what would it be? The Get Back from Your Bin, Disentomb.
I don't.
And it's got a lot of
Eternal Witness is what it is.
Yeah. It's got a lot of modality to it in that sort of situation, but it's not like it's pretty bad on rate, but I don't mind it being bad on rate. I think it's cool if it's bad on rate but does about a bajillion things. I think that's a great way to do a modal card, and I especially like that the modality of this is not very explicit. It's very much like you have to look and kind of unfocus your eyes in order to get the lenticular bit here, in order to get the implicit modality.
That was my next question. Is this card lenticular?
Extremely so, I think.
Okay, so as it is with the creature card, I think I'm often zombifying.
But of course it goes to your hand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not into the battlefield. Yeah,
you're right.
I made that mistake because it's like, oh, right, this is a boomerang or a zombify. No, it's a boomerang or a raised dead.
Yeah.
But you could counter someone else's zombify, but you are just putting that card into their hand so they can cast it.
Like what do you call those? The type of soft counter spells that return Reuben and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you do the scratch out the creature part of the thing, I think you have to maybe add green or white or something for putting enchantments into your hand, because I think only blue can only get instants, sorceries, and artifacts, and black gets creatures, not maybe planeswalkers, not sure. So
And lands.
I think black can bend to enchantments. Land is where it gets a little bit weird.
Lands, yeah.
Or it can only do that on Zendikar, maybe.
That's a good point there, because I've seen in Kaladesh where black's ability to return has been extended to artifacts, perhaps because of the prevalence of vehicles being like these weird creatures type stuff. So they would say return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand, and I'm like, oh, okay, I see. So black can bend towards the plane type matters thing.
Yeah, I think that there's ways that they compensate for that. They either leave it like not pushed on rate, or they like for vehicles particularly, they will earmark vehicle as a thing, because like I guess with vehicles they said like it's an artifact, not a creature, but black says, come on, it's kind of a creature.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I think that we've seen is that with this latest return to Innistrad, that realistically Raised Dead / Disentomb is kind of maybe already a little overcosted as a standalone card effect without a body attached to it. And so that you kind of can, bend it or push it or do a variety of different things to kind of amp it up and still keep it in that middling to playable space. Yeah. Bradley, what's your next card?
Oh, did we shout out to MaximumMiles on this one, by the way?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to MSE. Lightblade Master. Do y'all see this one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Winged Guardian. Okay, I guess it used to be called Winged Guardian, or maybe it was the art. Okay, never mind.
That's the art. This one's by C2H6.
Thank you. Yeah. What's the name of that column? Oh.
So that's card notes. It's like where you'd put various notes, but it doesn't show up in the columns.
All right, so this one's cool because I like that there is a flavorful way to make sure that what I would call creature buffs as a batch of counters and equipment and auras. Not to be spelled on text, but conceptually, only equipment really carries on from like a creature dying. So how do you make sure that you can give the same boons to counters and auras? Well, you have this keyword here. Now you can make those matter. I appreciate that very much. And I like that only like a first strike counter is added on this one for simplicity. It didn't try to go the extra mile of like, hey, when it enters, put a first strike counter on it. Also, tutor for an aura that costs whatever mana value, and then you can enchant it. It doesn't try to solve for all that, but it does give a little incentive to like, all right, this is why playing auras matter for this creature as well. So very cool to make the non-permanent, or what do you call it? Not the things that don't have an inherent legacy like equipment does now have a legacy.
I like the way that Legacy kind of earmarks you can only move one thing in total. It's a good way to avoid having just Voltron stuff happen as far as things go. I do kind of wish it was like you could move one thing to each creature you control, just because as this exists with coming in with a first strike counter on it, you have this kind of thing where you're like, I a little bit don't want to enchant this as opposed to my other legacy creatures because it might not be as good a rate in the face of removal. Obviously, like you'll end up with a big first strike guy that has assumedly like a buff aura and then also +1/+0. But if it ever interacts with destructive removal, then you're going to end up in a situation where you don't get to give the first strike counter and the aura away. You only get to give one or the other. But if it was limited to one thing per creature you control, then you'd be like, well, I don't want to stack up 5 enchantments on one creature unless I have 5 other creatures I can distribute those enchantments to when it passes away. So I think that's a good midpoint, but I could also see the argument that this just works fine as is. It might just be me kibitzing.
And one of the things is, of course, if you didn't give it the counter, then when you're... I would expect a lot of the legacy cards will come with some type of counter attached so that they have some like base level effect even if you didn't end up with a bunch of auras in your deck.
Yeah.
Another fun thing about this card, this might be very silly, but it doesn't have flying. And because it doesn't have flying, I both didn't notice the wings on the art or the fact that creature type bird was there. Like, my brain read, okay, this doesn't have flying, and then just ignored all of the signs that would typically point towards flying.
Ironically, I had the opposite thing. I had, okay, it's got wings, it's a bird warrior, and my brain overwrote first strike counter with flying counter, and I was just like, it took me like a second read to be like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Goodness gracious. That is, I've never heard the other way around before, where the the art got like misinterpreted because of what was on the text box. That's amazing. I forgot. Yeah, that's a good point. That's usually something that's very important to keep in mind with winged art and text box. So hey, keep making sure your birds have flying, everybody.
Obviously, that's more of an issue when Wizards does it and they're printing thousands and thousands of the cards and they're in control of the art and distribution than it is for.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, we're in this special type of design here.
And people aren't playing these limited formats for potentially tens of thousands of dollars.
Yep.
Though maybe that's not true. Anyways, moving on from a comment on Wizards organized play. Who's got the next card?
I believe
that would be Marcus here.
Yeah. Let's take a peek at my notes and figure out what I want.
You want to do your card?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what I... Oh, yeah, that's actually a good idea. I put it into the thing to put on the cast and everything, so I should probably do that. So, my card is Humble Sky Pilgrim. It's 2 and a blue for a bird monk. It's a 2/2 with flying, and it has the ability Air, with an H, not an A. As this enters the battlefield, you may exile a card from your graveyard that shares a subtype with it as its ancestor. This card gains its ancestor's abilities. So the idea here was to have something that's like a little bit tribal themed and a little bit kind of mix and match in the same sort of vein as something like Mutate, but like kept things a little bit limited, was not like inherently something where you're super Voltroning up as far as things go, and where you're like incentivized to do maybe a little bit of self-mill, maybe a little bit of like trying to figure out what the interesting synergies are, and also something where the tribal isn't super on rails. So assumedly you would probably have something along the lines of between 5 and 10 creature types that are like species or races, and then 5 and 10 classes that you would have distributed from among colors and color pairs, in order to make it so that you had things where it's like, okay, well, I know that I'm going to be able to have my human monks also get put on this. I'm going to be able to have my bird warriors also get put on this, things like that. And from there, be able to, build interesting cards. Maybe you have a monk with fire breathing that you can put on this to have a flying fire breathing guy. Maybe you have a bird that also has death touch, and so you can give death touch to this as well. And I think this works well in concept. I definitely think that it's very manageable to do at like common in a way that's not overwhelming. I think it might be slightly disappointing to have like an air card that you just play as a 3-mana 2/2 flyer, which is slightly worrying for me, but I think it's the sort of thing that I could easily test and see where it lands.
I like this card. Maybe it's partly this flavor and art and everything together with the ability being named air. But I like this card in if you go back to like Tarkir, and you can kind of silo to a certain extent creature types or subtypes so that like there's kind of adjacency across the various colors. Because then like in the like Abzan sort of space, you have like their kin tree stuff, whereas in the like Jeskai Ojita space, you got their monks and everything. And as long as each one is really only seeing the subtypes of the color that is like itself or immediately adjacent to it, you can have this ability. But like, yeah, all the blue-white cards with air are really different from all of the like black and green cards with air, for instance. Despite the fact that it's the exact same ability, like they kind of exist in these two different silos. The other thing I really want from this card, from this mechanic, is a artifact equipment with air, so that you can like pull the abilities of two different equipments, so you can effectively get like the equip cost of one equipment and the
Oh
like
my gosh.
equipped creature has whatever abilities from another equipment, which really only works with equipment because they have a subtype and a lot of the cost of an equipment is an ability rather than like its top cost.
Well, so interestingly, you'll get the abilities and equip costs of all of them. So at the end of that, maybe you would just do it as just an equipment that just has air, and no like actual text on itself as far as things go. Maybe that's a little too cute. But at the end of it, you would have like the buffs of 2 equipment at the cost of presumably your like equip 0 equipment that you chose as one of the 2. Which is incredibly sweet as far as things go. I think auras also work deceptively well because they're likely to end up in the
graveyard
bin.
easier.
Yeah, they get in the bin pretty easily, and then so much of the rate is just in the buff, where like a little bit of the rate in equipment is on the cheap equip ability. So you could have like a cheap aura that has a dies trigger that's like pretty good, and then you have like an air aura that gives you like pretty decent stats, and you end up with something that cumulatively is like a pretty strong aura that you can glue together both things on quite easily, and that's nice.
I also think not to just keep pulling on like what if we went back and did this thing, but like this would be a good way of doing a successor to Splice onto Arcane in a like Kamigawa-esque set where like okay, the thing we're doing is we're kind of playing off of the idea of Soul Shift and the mechanical like Splice onto Arcane by having instant arcane instants and sorceries that can like kind of recast but just once a arcane instant or sorcery in your graveyard because they share that subtype.
Oh yeah, so you like exile the card from the bin and then you get to staple its text onto this. That's nice.
Card once, and then your next card can cast the previous one, but just the part of it that's actually on the card because the stapled part is now in exile.
Yeah, so you get like rather than having like it continually happen, you only get to have it happen once. But you can do interesting things where you have like a kill spell that's got like just deal 1 damage and death touch in black, and then it's got that like splice effect on it, so you can give some other burn spell also death touch, and you can do a lot of things with that, I think. And the fact that it's rate limited avoids the repetitive game state. That's sweet.
This could also be a space for a like, hey, we want to do something a lot like overload and jumpstart. We want like the experimental, like, is it sort of flavor, and this is our experiment flavor rather than our like the lineage of ancestors flavor. I love what you've done with this mechanic. Basically,
I think it has a lot of potential, and like when it came to me as far as things go, I was immediately enamored with it and knew that I had like a thing that I was going to do. Sometimes like I'll get to near the end of a day and be like, okay, this is what I've come up with, but I'm not super confident in it. This one I think like has like maybe one sour spot, but other than that, I like it quite a bit.
I think you all have already said what I feel about this. Besides, I've already given you a sneak peek about when you shared this in the Discord, but definitely think this is ready to go to make a whole set around. Because like what Juliet was, hinted at with the being able to do air on an equipment, blacksmith like sword stuff, by the way, like that's so cool. That already opens up so many archetypes, because now you can just do tribal over here, equipment and auras over there. You're ready. This is awesome.
All right.
Shout out to Mark Confidant for that design.
That's a silly name.
That funky designer, very well done.
Our next one is in the MSC file, designed by Juliet.
All right.
I think it's Julie T. Maybe we just forgot the punctuation.
Yeah, big fan of her version of the Tempest.
If Juliet, if you're listening out there, sorry if we butchered your name. Yeah.
This card's name is Borrowing Tomorrow, which is to me a very good mouthfeel. One of the things I've gone for a lot of the Eventide Jumpstart Remix cards are names that, while not like always perfectly intuitive, do something fun when you say it out loud with your human mouth, like Duergar Takran or Borrowing Tomorrow. It's a sorcery with untap and exert all permanents you control. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. It's for 1 and a Boros hybrid mana, and flavor text, if a night lasts 300 years, of what use is waiting for tomorrow?
All right, this is, I like Final Fortune effects, and I think this gets away from what I dislike about Final Fortune effects, which is when I cast a Final Fortune, I am telling the table, especially in a commander game where there is a difference between one person losing versus a 1v1 where the game continues. I am telling the table, hey, I'm going to stop playing now soon. So unless someone counters it, either I take you all out or I get taken out. So this is instead gives a little more like, hey, I'm going to take a risky play, but maybe still stick around. I really appreciate that.
I like this as a savor the moment style effect, and I assume that's what you're going for in terms of what this is evoking. And it's a really good callback to like a very pushed effect, but one that has kind of like an interesting rate limiting on it. I'm not positive about permanence because like I'm worried about like the sort of thing where you like swing in with all your creatures and then you go like second main phase, play a 6-drop on turn 4 and also get your extra combat step. Like having the untapped 6-drop, even if all the rest of your guys are exerted, seems pretty intimidating. Obviously, that largely depends on what else is in this red-white Jumpstart pack. So there's like some context of like, you might have to say, I'm going to strip out most of the expensive things from this, or I'm going to have to strip out the stuff that would be like pretty worrisome to cast second main phase in the context of this. And I'm not sure how it feels as like a stormy spell in like some constructed format, but I'm also not sure that it's designed for that context.
Yeah, it definitely, if this was outside of the Jumpstart silo, I think the costing would need addressing, and potentially even the color situation. The red-white pack is built around what I tend to call Exert Exploit, which is it's a lot like Exploit from, Silumgar, Tarkir, but instead of missing a creature, you tap and exert a creature you control to get the effect. And so the creature comes in and, well, somebody's got to do, I made it an ability word called Hard Work, just to keep it all the same. It's all Duergar, mining and everything. And it's like, well, somebody's got to do this work. Somebody's got to tap and exert in order to get this effect on this enter the battlefield. And so you potentially have a bunch of your creatures that, like, you might cast this, and it's like, great, I was able to untap all my creatures. End my turn. I had way too many of my creatures tapped. I'm going to untap them so that next turn I can do the attack and give up this combat phase. One of the things that I've done a lot of in Jumpstart is look at when you have, like, multiple powerful things happening on the same card, such that it's relatively difficult to get the full payout of each of them, because that way from like game to game, you're having effects that feel like swingy and powerful at times, and there's kind of this like potential it could reach, but a lot of the time you're not getting everything, especially because there's enough creatures and enough like generic manifest bodies around that like you're not getting a super strong alpha strike out of this or a double alpha strike all that often. And there aren't because you're not building your deck, you can't like say, hey, I'm gonna put 5-6 drops in this so I can just use this as a ritual and always have that kind of board control.
That's a cool direction of having so much that you could go and try to get benefits from, but you don't have the means to invest in maximizing it. That's awesome. That's something I would take. I think I'm going to have as a takeaway for designing future if I ever need to utilize that tool somewhere.
I think
I also love just saying untap and exert. I think it's a really fun, like, do you wanna use that? It's untapped.
Yeah, because you're
double exert, it doesn't work, right? As in, like, if you get extra value by exerting like 3 times on something, it only gets punished once, right?
Right.
Awesome. Okay, so this is great for the exert pack as well for anyone who's already exerted.
One thing I think works particularly well is when like you can put a lot of points into disparate things in Jumpstart and rely on the fact that like the Jumpstart pack might be slightly synergistic with itself, but you don't optimize for that synergy super aggressively. And then B, you can rely on the fact that like there will probably be a few synergies between any given Jumpstart pack, but nothing that's going to be like as though you were just building a constructed deck, or even as though you were doing like a super well thought out like limited archetype. Instead, you have this like, well, this is what you get, and you don't pitch a fit sort of thing of like A and B, and they work together however well they work together. And so sometimes you'll have like 1 or 2 cards in your pack hit way above rate because they play super nicely with whatever the other strategy that you're paired with is. But then some of the time you'll have like a card that is like really just a smoking hot, super strong card. And in the context of what you're doing, its value is like marked down to the point where it's still good, but it's just like, yeah, it's okay. I'm not blown away by it because it doesn't fit super great into the game plan of these things cumulatively, or it's asynergistic with the other things that I'm doing, or I can't fully exploit it because I have no like thumb on the scale when it comes to the construction of my deck. It's a really nice way to create like powerful cards that are impressive and then let them get their impressive moments only sporadically.
All right. And I think, Bradley, you've got the last card.
Oh, gosh. All right. So let's go to MSE file. The card called Family's Plot. A very simple card, but something that's doing, making me think a bit here. Okay. So the MDFCs from Zendikar are essentially choose a basic land type of 1 of 2 on it. And then we've seen the Thriving Cycle from Jumpstart, which is we already have a color picked and you get to choose any other color. So it's a little more flexibility. But before that, it's a punishment. You have to enter the battlefield tapped for this Thriving land. In this case, now this one is like, okay, what if we took the MDFC thing, but instead it's like 5 different sides and you still have to be punished for getting tapped or for doing a little more flexibility, but you get to choose one of any 5 sides. So I thought that was this might already be explored because I know how prolific Magic designers are, especially if you look at Cleave. There's already tons of designs on Cleave, so there might already be something after the Thriving Cycle came out or the MDFCs that someone has designed this. But it's first time I'm seeing this here, and maybe your first time too. And I think this is neat, even though there is a memory thing to do. Besides that logistics problem, neat.
One thing that I was cubing yesterday with a friend, and I realized that the Thriving Lands are functionally in Evolving Wilds a huge amount of the time. Or like in Evolving Wilds with upside because you're functionally getting a, outside of landfall synergies, obviously, but you're getting a dual land that is one of the colors, like the color that's printed on it, and then one other color. So if you're really like desperate for mana fixing, or if you're in like a peasant cube or something like that, you can just have them and be like, okay, I'm in blue-red, but I'm taking this black one because I can have it be either blue or red. And this takes that to kind of like the extreme of just being the Evolving Wilds effect, but minus the shuffle. I think that stuff is a little bit like memory issue-y, but you could easily also do this in a format where you're rewarding basic land types in some fashion, and it would probably be just better than Evolving Wilds because it's not as much of a pain in the butt.
Yeah, my first instinct was like, oh, but what if this had like changeling for lands, but only when it's in your library? Or like, what if this was a basic land but didn't have any types, and it only like enters and then gains the type, and then it's an enter the battlefield, but like once it's on the battlefield, other cards look at it and see, oh, you're a basic mountain, if you chose mountain.
That's a great point about evolving wilds. Which do you think is the greater evil here? Shuffling your library or fetching and including basic lands besides the evolving wilds, or the memory issue?
I'm going to say I think that it is Evolving Wilds, but I think there are players for which the memory issue is worse because they move their lands around too much. And I think I might be one of those players a lot of the time. I'll like pile my lands into different ways to try and figure out how I'm going to cast spells. And I'll play enough musical chairs, I could see myself accidentally, like, if I had like 3 mountains and 2 islands and this was a mountain functionally, I could see myself accidentally shuffling it into the islands and it like becoming an island because I'm just being a little bit like unfocused. But that's me more than it is broadly players in general.
It could be many players as well as like you.
Yeah, so
that way.
It might be bad for like a slice of players, but on the mean better than Evolving Wilds.
And there's a lot of players with if they're playing this in their commander deck, there's a lot of players, including me, that has a tough time shuffling an entire 90 something or 80 something whenever you're cracking an Evolving Wilds library. So you have to split it up into 2 piles, or especially I guess you're shuffling up before the game, so it's a 99. So yep.
I just had a thought for how to do something like this, but for a Fabled Passage instead of an Evolving Wilds. So as it enters the battlefield, choose a basic land type, and it enters tapped if you control no other lands of that type.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you're rewarding having it already there.
Yeah, so you can either have an ETB untapped land or get one of your colors that you don't currently have.
Now we're iterating here.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I haven't really. I'd have to have some time to think about the balance and all that. But yes, I think it would be interesting to care about already having it available. It's kind of like if you use the same name as the card, it's kind of like you already have the family plot around and it's easy to extend it. Maybe you inherited more. Do you all see the designer credit card or credit on this?
Let's see if I can find the designer credit.
This one's by Core 22.
Thank you.
Yeah, for some reason, like the designer credit, I have to pull up the separate MSC file instead of the file that I'm just like casting to. It's tricky. But yeah.
Thanks everybody for your designs. A lot of awesome stuff.
That's our show. Thank you to Bradley, Rose, and Juliet for joining me today. Thank you to Caillou for putting this show together. Thank you to Cajun for setting up bot submission on Discord. Thanks to Ancestral for setting up the submission system on mtg.design. If you'd like to know more about Moxtober or custom magic in general, check out #MTGMoxtober on Twitter, r/custom magic on Reddit, mtg.design, or the Beacon of Creation or Custom Magic Discords, or the Beacon of Creation podcast. Hopefully we'll see you there, and either way, I hope you all have a great day. Bye.